We come to the last session for today. It's kind of a panel, but it's supposed to be a quick panel. It's a power talk. We will see what this is. We have learned from Jonathan Cantor this morning what is going on in the US. We see vigorous enforcement. Is it Chicago versus Brandeis? Who's going to win? Who's going to stay? And this is what this panel is about, and that will be chaired by Ruprecht Potzun, a professor from Düsseldorf University, and he's been working for the Bundeskartellamt for a couple of years in my unit. Mr. Potzun, you have the floor.
Disclose why I left the Bundeskartellamt. no offense, of course. Sorry.
Excellent joke. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, to this power talk and power panel. I wondered why we are called power panel, and I thought it cannot be economic power because all four of us are from public service. So I don't know whether any one of you has a unicorn or something at home.
I have a wealthy wife, so.
Oh,
It's a plus factor. I spend the money she makes.
Any disclosures from the two of you in this regard? Okay.
No comment.
Well, I thought the reason why this is a power talk is because these people really wielded political power. Let me briefly introduce them. David Lawrence is the policy director of the Department of Justice in the antitrust division, and that means he's running the show of reform that we are currently witnessing. He's been around there for quite a while, so since 2011, I think you've joined the DOJ in 2011. Yes. So David Lawrence is sort of representing Jonathan Cantor in person this day. Next to him is Fiona Scott-Morton, who's my personal chief economist, if I may say so, pardon my French. But of course, she's a professor of economics at the Yale University, at the School of Management there, and one of the greatest sort of bridging people on transatlantic issues, I think. She knows the EU, the DMA probably better than I do. And of course, she knows all the US antitrust law, where I have no idea about, but she's an economist. And she was in the DOJ as well. Okay, that was, of course, an admiring statement. Sorry if you got that wrong. Fiona was in the DOJ a couple of years ago as well. And our third panelist is, of course, Bill Kovacic, who's known to some of us as a former chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, to some of us as a professor of law at the George Washington University. To me, he's known as the volcano of antitrust panels. You never know whether he erupts, but it's always spectacular to watch, even if he doesn't erupt.
That's why I'm sitting over here.
Let's see what happens today. Bill, we are so honored and pleased that you're here.
Yeah, thanks.
Not with us on the panel is Louis Brandeis. He couldn't make it today. And I was told I should better introduce while we discuss his theories, because I've learned that some people in the room are not yet familiar with what Brandeisian antitrust, what the Brandeisian movement is. I'm not sure whether I'm the right to lecture on that, but I fear that none of you is sort of volunteering to do that. So just very briefly, Louis Brandeis was a Supreme Court justice in the United States. He was probably one of the most eminent legal thinkers in the beginning of the 20th century. He lived from 1856 to 1941. And he wrote a book called, he coined the phrase, the curse of bigness, which later Tim Wu made a very popular statement, and Tim Wu, Lina Khan, Jonathan Cantor, they are probably the three people, apart from maybe the new combo of Andreas Munn, Christina Cafaro, and we need a third one. Any volunteers? Okay, only the two of you. So Tim Wu, Jonathan Cantor, Lina Khan, they stand for a new movement of antitrust, if I may say so, in the sense of it's more progressive, more integrating other concepts. We will probably discuss all that. This is what some of you may still know as hipster antitrust, that was sort of rebranded as Brandeisian antitrust, or new progressive antitrust, whatever you may call it. We will see what that is. In Germany, I think we call that ordoliberal, but that's maybe a bold proposition. Okay. To give this a start, I have an easy question to start with, and two-word answers are preferred. Why do we do antitrust at all? David, you want to give us a go on that?
Can I do 3 words?
Okay.
We do antitrust for the people. We do antitrust to protect our people.
Fiona.
We do antitrust to make capitalism work.
On both of their comments, to provide assurance to society that the gains from capitalism are broadly shared, and as an alternative to regulation, which would be much more comprehensive if you didn't have antitrust.
Wow, I think we could end the panel here and go back and think about these 3 comments. None of you mentioned consumer welfare, I noticed that, or efficiency.
People are
No,
consumers.
people are consumers making capitalism work because you limited my number of words. I didn't say for the citizens and consumers.
But workers,
that would
of course,
be,
are people too.
Citizens are everybody.
The phrase is so bankrupt and arid that to utter it almost is to invite divine retribution. It just gets nowhere.
Okay, so we leave it with what you said. It's for the people. That's a good starting point. David, you're working for the government. Your definition, your job description is to work for the people, of course. And I want to invite you in maybe less than half an hour, maybe a couple of minutes only, to describe the achievements of what has changed after Jonathan Cantor took over, the Biden administration took over. So what is sort of what we perceive the shift as the shift sort of that has happened in U.S. antitrust. What do you think are the main achievements that you can sort of briefly tell the audience, which is those of us who are not American, as achievements?
Just a warning, never ask a government official to detail their own achievements.
I know, but I've Bill on the panel, so he can sort of go against that.
And I should just start by saying my enormous appreciation for this event, to the Bundeskartellamt and to Andreas for putting it all together. I honestly I had not been here before, didn't know what to expect. This is a phenomenal conference. Both what's happened up here and the audience out there and the networking, I mean, all of you are contributing to a remarkable event, so thank you for having me here. I have been privileged to serve in the antitrust division for something like 13 years. And I'll start by saying that in my first 10 years at the agency, that had many tremendous accomplishments, and I think we saw a significant evolution in that time period in the way that we were enforcing the antitrust laws. That said, the last 3 years, we've had a tremendous wind at our back from the administration and the new officials, and the accomplishments have been remarkable. I mean, the pace of change and the pace of development has been tremendous. It's too much to list, but we've seen a great many seeds that were planted in the past bloom with encouragement, and we've seen critical new seeds planted. I'll just quickly detail 3 buckets of things that I think are most important. First, litigation. We're a law enforcement agency, so we bring cases before the courts. And when I first started at the agency, litigation was a thing that happened every few years, and you whispered about it. You don't want to go to litigation. We have become a litigation agency. We've litigated, I think, 10 or 12 significant cases going back over the last few years, really an unprecedented number. And at the beginning, the first several, we didn't meet with success. We believed in those cases, but we saw a number of losses. And a narrative sort of emerged on the outside, maybe they're moving too far, too fast. But what was going on the inside is we were learning how to tell our story to the courts, how to take complicated and technical antitrust concepts and build those cases. And we've suddenly seen, I think as a result, that sort of narrative shatter in the last 6 months or so, where the agencies have been on a tremendous string of successes. So the department has now won its last 3 merger challenges in a row to get court opinions. Over at the FTC, it's the last 2 have been wins. And some of these are what I would have normally said are generational advances in the law. And probably most importantly so far, Illumina Grail. This is a court opinion in a vertical merger that finds the merger prima facie anti-competitive under the Clayton Act. That is the first time since I was born.
With innovation competition.
With innovation competition and a lot of excellent support. So you have innovation competition and vertical harm, an enormous advance in the law. Seeds that were planted years ago but have sort of exploded, the agencies have gotten more and more able to do that. So that's just one example on the litigation front, but that's a big, I think, accomplishment. On the policy front, a number of really, I think, significant advances as well. We'll talk a little bit about our merger guidelines, but that was one of the most robust conversations among the antitrust community about the right way to do merger reform I think that has ever happened. And the document we produced is sort of the report of the result. There's also a tremendous amount of FTC work on the policy front, regulations and policy statements as well. And I also would urge folks to focus on the amicus. This is when we go to a court not in our own case, but to argue about a legal issue. And there have been enormous advances there on things like labor markets, on things like monopolization, where we filed really a large number. Almost every month we're filing something. And probably most significantly is in the labor context. So we have a number of court decisions explicitly finding in the United States harm in a labor market alone is enough, including one from a Court of Appeals judge, Judge Easterbrook, who is one of the most famous conservative judges on the bench in the United States. And literally while we were debating with the antitrust bar in the United States the fact that our merger guidelines said labor market harms alone are enough, he wrote a Court of Appeals decision that said just that. And so again, I see major advances there on the policy front. And finally, just briefly, the interagency side. And this is, people may have heard about the whole of government approach, this executive order, that the president has asked not just DOJ and FTC, but every federal agency to focus on competition. And I'll say those familiar with US antitrust enforcement, it has been a bipartisan priority for a long time to ensure that regulatory agencies are acting in ways that promote competition, both affirmatively and by not imposing rulemakings that cement markets. And this executive order has really revolutionized and transformed the way those interactions are taking place. Again, probably too many specific things to list, but one notable one I'll note is the Office of Management and Budget, which is the central coordinator in the United States, has issued a detailed paper to all of the federal agencies. It's called a circular, and these things last for many administrations, that instructs them how to analyze competition issues and regulations, and instructs them to do so. So that alongside the cost-benefit analysis already being done, there's now a unit on competition impacts of regulatory actions, and this is one of many significant actions. We only have 40 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Bill, you've been following the debate, of course, very closely, and you've been active as well as an enforcer a couple of years ago. Do you share sort of the maybe slightly biased assessment by David?
No, David's done a good job there. No, I think that's an honest and accurate portrayal of accomplishments. One thing that's notable that you wouldn't have seen perhaps 2 years ago, and you certainly wouldn't have seen from the fan base that has propelled the change, is that David did not speak ill of the past. David said there were good things that happened before, and that is not the narrative of the transformation movement that came in. They ascended to power by saying that everything that took place basically before January of 2021 was depraved, the result of bad judgment and bad people. David said that there were some good things before. If
he was there as well, so I mean...
as has Doha Meki in a lot of her presentations. If you want your program to endure, and that's the question I've really asked myself for today, is this durable? In the words of Richard Neustadt and Ernest May, will it stick? One thing you do to make it stick is that you make it embedded in a continuum of activity going on over time. Is this remarkable? Is this the largest number of cases? I know what some of those data sets look like. I might quarrel with you about that. And if we were to had the Reagan administration officials on the dais here 3 years in, they would have talked about the AT&T breakup. They would have talked about two key merger blocks, one involving petroleum. The FTC blocked Mobil's effort to buy Marathon. The FTC blocked Northrop's effort to merge with Grumman. We could have had a pretty good list. I do think that these are important because they do signal a change in direction. But if has anyone been able to put on the table something more important than the AT&T breakup? So many authorities would have the ability after 3 years to say, I've got some good things to talk about. Formative matters. But I think David's picked some good ones. I guess a difficulty that comes with arriving in office, setting exalted expectations about what you're going to do. And President Biden, I think somewhat improvidently, announced the signature piece of his work, the broad competition statement. That's the 40 years of failure speech, where we went off the rails. Bork led us there. It's his fault. We followed him. Of course, for 8 of those years, you were vice president, and how could a smart guy like you be beguiled this way? But that we failed for 40 years. The expectations have been set very high. Let me just mention a couple of pieces of unfinished business. One, what are we really going to do with the Robinson-Patman Act, where the DOJ in 1977 said we're not going to enforce it? There's a criminal provision in that statute that only the department can enforce. What are we going to do with the effort to bring Section 2 cases that have a criminal component? How much are we going to lean on that? Is that going to be a core of our program later on? Are we going to go and take a look at other older guidelines, collaboration, intellectual property, international, that have items that are not completely consistent with the new approach? And notice how many things are going on now we would call incomplete because they're works in progress. So as Jonathan, I think, this morning said, we're off to a good start. I'd agree with that. That is, these programs fit that definition.
We will revert to the question of whether that lasts or not. But let's first maybe put a bit of focus on the merger guidelines, because that's probably the piece of legislation or the piece of guidance that was really sort of, or that many people in Europe and other parts of the world looked at. David, maybe 2 seconds on what is the major shift in the merger guidelines for those who haven't looked at that?
So in 2 seconds, I'll go just a little bit longer.
Okay.
Just give me 40. The new merger guidelines are comprehensive. And the ambition from the start was to be comprehensive in their discussion of how the antitrust division handles mergers. And that was that's the first time that the agency had desired to do a fully comprehensive treatment. And comprehensive in 2 key respects. One is the theories of harm covered. So we had only previously had horizontal merger guidelines. We updated the horizontal merger guidelines. Meanwhile, and I talked about seeds that have bloomed, we had started to bring entrenchment cases like Visa Plaid. We had started to bring vertical cases like AT&T Time Warner. And so the new guidelines cover all of those theories of harm because, of course, it's little guidance to business if they can read your 35-page merger guidelines document, sign a merger deal, and then find themselves mired in an entrenchment investigation for 1.5 years, right? So they're comprehensive in that respect. They're also comprehensive with respect to the dimensions of competition that they're focused on. So they talk broadly throughout in terms of competition, and they underscore that in different markets, you might have different forms of competition, whether it's over privacy or price or quality or what have you. And the one other shift I'll mention quickly, they have a real respect for uncertainty. We cannot predict the future. Right? Nobody in this room can predict the future. Merger simulations cannot predict the future. Structural presumptions cannot predict the future. But there are a number of tools that can help us identify the risk that a merger may harm competition in the future. And that's the standard under our statute. And the new guidelines have a great respect for that in the way they're drafted.
If you look behind the economics or the economics behind this, what's your assessment of this?
I think the economics has played an enormous role. I actually would depart from my friend Andreas's critique of this as being the more economic approach is being thrown away. I actually think we're doubling down on it. And the difference is that we're not doing economics from 1975. We're doing actual real frontier economics, which includes things like behavioral economics, which includes strategy and game theory, which includes modern measurement tools, which includes ideas of uncertainty, which includes models of ecosystems and two-sided markets. And we have all of these tools, and there's no reason we can't use them in antitrust. And what we have seen in the last 10 years is when you do, you have a much more robust pro-enforcement program because you're recognizing what firms are doing. Like those economic papers are about firm strategy and how you get profit. And so when you're accurately able to understand the behavior on the ground, then you're accurately able to figure out what's pro-competitive and what's anti-competitive. So I would say, just to add to the merger guidelines, which I think are excellent, we used to have in the US the horizontal merger guidelines and the vertical merger guidelines, and roughly speaking, managers thought vertical was fine and they could do anything they wanted, and horizontal, they might be in trouble, excuse me, if the market definition wasn't good enough for them. And what was wrong about that, of course, is that you can have harmful related market mergers. And when we have a vertical merger, we think of it, you use that English word, and you think of it as the steel goes into the fender, goes into the car, goes to the distributor, whereas what we're dealing with today is Google Fitbit and Google Waze and these kinds of ecosystem mergers that are just related. They're not actually a stream of atoms. And we needed new vocabulary to talk about that. And those mergers then bring us to a monopolization frame, or like an acquisition of market power that is, so David used the word entrenchment. I don't really think we need a new word. I think you could just call it monopolization or maintenance of monopoly. And so then we see that merger enforcement mushes in to monopolization, and it's, I think, very nice to have a document that treats all of these things together so that if you're running a business, you can read that and have just a more comprehensive view. But I do not think we're getting rid of economics. I think we're using a lot of new economics.
If we broaden the focus a bit again, do you think that's sort of, if you look at the whole Brandeisian movement, if I may call it like this, are there new economic insights behind this? You mentioned some for the merger guidelines. Do you think this is really, we know something else than before, or have we shifted political priorities?
No.
Or is it just a label or a narrative? How would you frame that?
Yeah, it's just a label. Neo-Brandeisians don't like economics, and part of the everything was terrible before 2021 was we used economics before 2021. But the use of the field is a neutral tool. I mean, you can use it for good or not good. What characterizes the Neo-Brandeisian wing of the debate in the United States is that it is bringing in different considerations than price, quality, and innovation, which are what economists have always focused on. So what are those? A preference for small business, per se, small business, a preference for local control, big is bad, and democracy. And every time I'm on a panel with somebody like that, I say, okay, so we have a merger, and it raises price, but it also raises democracy. So how do I trade off more democracy with a higher price? And I have never received an answer to that question, because it's obviously a very difficult question. But what we see in the program that David outlined is actually none of that. That rhetoric is not happening in the United States. What's happening is, let's look at labor markets. Let's look at uncertainty. Let's think about how mergers affect monopolization. Let's just push the frontier and be better at enforcing.
To the real Neo-Brandeisian hardcore, these guidelines are a sellout.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
is, there was a strong desire in the supporting literature from that wing of the field of thought, as Fiona was describing it, that said, get that stuff out of there. Go down to the thresholds that the Supreme Court seemed to accept between 1962 and 1972. Get this complicated, costly economics out of there and go back to really simple tools. So this document is far less accepting of that vision than it might have been.
So maybe just a few footnotes on that, because I'm not quite sure I would go that far. You know, the guidelines do contain a structural presumption from Philadelphia National Bank 60 years ago in the Supreme Court, and you know, they in fact explicitly state that among the benefits of competition enforcement is preservation of economic and of political and social institutions conducive to our democracy, and they quote the Supreme Court for that. And it is a complicated question, Fiona, but if you want to ask about the day-to-day, so what do we mean? I mean, competition supports our democracy, it supports our economic liberty. That's foundational to the idea that capitalist democracies are distinct from communism and dictatorship. It's important. What does that mean in the day-to-day? I do think the uncertainty question plays in here, because the reaction to uncertainty of the agencies for a number of decades was, it's better not to act. If we're not too sure, we better not act, because there's this error cost analysis, and if you play out the type 1 errors against the type 2 errors and you compare the two sides, there's too much risk there. But what about the risk of permitting concentration that is harmful to our democracy? That tends to augur in favor of intervention. And so the answer to uncertainty that's applied in the merger guidelines is the answer that Congress gave to exactly that question. They say, if the effect of the merger may be to substantially lessen competition, it's not saying we're certain, but in that space of uncertainty, we should be more likely to take action because we recognize there's broad benefits from the antitrust laws.
So the quibble I have with what you said is, let's worry about uncertainty that may be harmful to our democracy. Why don't we just say harmful to consumers?
Well,
Like
so the
that.
uncertainty is about the effects of the merger. I'm saying that the sort of
Right.
decision
We're not
rule
giving
of how
the
you
judge
handle.
the democracy issue. Yeah.
Correct, but upstream of that, when you're determining the basic standards that you're applying, some of these considerations play in.
You could have quoted the soaring rhetoric from a number of other cases that deal with the trade-off that Fiona was mentioning. You could have quoted the passage in Brown Shoe that said, this might have efficiency benefits, but it would come at the cost of an environment that is supportive for small firms, and we willingly sacrifice some of the efficiency benefits, the lower price, to some extent, for the sake of preserving that environment. That quote's not in the document.
I will just say it's quite interesting to think about what you do with that, because many of the people in the United States who want to have this support for small business, well, unfortunately, there are two types. There's a type that's my demographic. Lots of money, you live in a nice town, you can walk down to the center of your town and you can buy expensive items from small stores. And I think that's a lovely lifestyle, but projecting that onto people, of whom we have many in the United States that are low income, who want to go to Walmart because it is less expensive. I think it's difficult to be an elite person and say, I'm going to make a decision for you that you will pay more for your groceries because I want you to shop at a small store. That strikes me as quite a dangerous policy position to take. So that's one thing. And then, of course, there are some small businesses like car dealers in the United States that are extremely good at rent seeking, and they would like to be protected from competition from larger businesses. And so this small business emphasis can be quite dangerous, and you have to be really careful, I think, as a policymaker.
But I wonder if you would agree that, thinking about monopolization or mergers that entrench power by increasing barriers to entry, that small business opportunity is enabled by the contestability of markets that supports more competitive markets.
Yeah, but there, I want every size to be able to come in. I mean, the fact that they're small there's more of them, and so we get more contestability, and that's great, but it's not the fact that you have the adjective small there doesn't actually change the answer. I'd be in favor of it whatever size they were.
The formative jurisprudence did not confront the hard issue about where there might be friction and trade-offs.
No, it did confront it. They didn't do it.
They did not provide any suggestion about how you go about doing it.
That's good. Which is good.
I take it from your statements that this is not only about big tech, right? So we perceive the movement as starting with big tech. I mean, the Amazon antitrust paradox, for instance, by Lina Khan was sort of a starting point of this debate, maybe. But now you're talking a lot about more traditional markets, right? Have we been too fixated on big tech, maybe, in our debate?
Yes. I mean, in the framework of this set of issues, the agenda, as reflected in the whole of government document referred before. It's agriculture, it's pharmaceuticals, it's across the board, it's not just big tech.
And agriculture is a terrific example. Jonathan mentioned it briefly this morning, but in the United States, for example, there's a lot of concentration in meat packing. And so we saw, and this bore out in the statistics, this is a cow goes to a meat packer and then a hamburger sold to a store. I won't get into the details, it's not pretty. But we saw that the prices of the hamburger at the store were going up to consumers at the same time that the farmers' returns on heads of cattle was going down. That's gatekeeper
You can
power.
graph it. Yeah.
That's a problem, right? And so we have some enforcement matters in that space, but then this has also played a little bit into the industrial policy conversation in the United States, where one of the things the administration did was sponsor entry in the meatpacking layer in certain key markets, and that's something that's going on right now.
So let me just say, the Americans are really good at giving a lot of rhetoric, and they come to conferences in Europe and tell you things, and you just have to be a little careful about taking it at face value, much as I love David. I mean, let's just think about this I like this EO that's the whole of government, but frankly, our agencies are very captured and very entrenched, and they're not doing anything. So for example, the Department of Transportation allowed the JetBlue American Alliance on the last day of the Trump administration. Biden then issued the executive order. Did the Department of Transportation just undo that alliance? No. My taxpayer dollar went to the Department of Justice to engage in litigation in Boston to go to get on the stand and prove in court that this was a bad alliance, whereupon the judge said it had to be unwound. That's not a whole of government. That's one agency litigating against the other one, effectively. The Department of Agriculture is terrible. They are doing nothing. So, it's a great aspiration, and I hope it works, and this OMB thing sounds good, but I think we need to check back in 5 years, because my perception is they're all just as terrible as they were before. Sorry.
I will
Speak for your government. Go ahead.
I will say that
very briefly.
Things don't change overnight, but I have seen, and I've experienced it for many years, it's gone on for decades of the agencies pushing the antitrust agencies pushing other agencies. There has been a sea change in the responsiveness, focus, and investment of some of these other agencies to those conversations.
Okay.
If you don't lean on them for a long time, though, they'll revert.
I wanted to, we are already discussing what is happening in 5 years, and not in 5 years, but in a couple of months, we'll have another election in the United States that everyone in the world is looking at with sort of some...
Trepidation?
You said it. Fiona.
Hope you've paid up your defense budgets.
You're still laughing at that one. Fiona, what will happen in November, or what will happen? Is this here to stay, or are we sort of seeing a sort of long-term shift in antitrust enforcement, or can all this be sort of turned back if something happens in November?
I'll let these guys talk about the politics of it, but one of the reasons that I think the evolution that David talked about that began really 10 or 15 years ago has turned into a revolution is because as we took these steps forward, we started looking for evidence, and we found an awful lot of, and I will say economists did, a whole variety of economists have done a lot of work measuring and looking at some of the conduct in these different markets and have found really bad and harmful behavior. We've seen killer acquisitions, we've seen stealth acquisitions, we've seen problems in labor markets, we've seen problems in tech, and so it's really become very evident that we needed to dial up enforcement quite significantly. That evidence isn't going away. So whether we continue to enforce or not, I think there's a lot of factors, and I'll let these guys talk about it, but I do think our learning has really changed the views of many people. I mean, Andrea started saying, is this Chicago versus neo-Brandeisian? I don't see Chicago people on panels anymore. They're just gone. And I think it's because the evidence that has accumulated in the last 10 years is sufficiently strong that that's just not a point of view that you can come to an event and articulate and have support for anymore. So that's one factor that will play into what happens going forward.
Bill, Fiona invited you to comment on politics a bit. Maybe you can also say a word on courts, because that is something that we perceive as sort of in Europe at least, as sort of the obstacle to a reformist agenda. Is that sort of the case for the United States? Will the Supreme Court endorse whatever is coming from David's unit?
If you want to carry out a transformative program, not just make adjustments, but a transformative program, you've got to win a couple of elections. And in a basic sense, much of what David's been referring to, the policy, none of it's irreversible. I think the underlying intellectual foundations are just as Fiona has described them, and much of that would endure. But you have to win a couple of elections. If Biden doesn't get a second term, much of this can change. And one of the most crucial things the president does to pick judges. Roughly 20 to 25% of the bench turns over every 4 years. Biden's been picking a lot of judges. Through the beginning of the month, it was about 165 confirmed and on the job. Strikingly, though, not one of them out of 165 is a competition or regulatory policy expert. The Reagan administration deliberately in its first term said we're going to put academics on the courts of appeals who have a lot of intellectual capital. Who'd they pick? They picked Dick Posner, they picked Frank Easterbrook, they picked Doug Ginsburg, they picked Nino Scalia, they picked Bob Bork, Ralph Winter, It was a cohort of about a dozen. This was a deliberate policy to take people who had the intellectual capital to write opinions that would change the law. I am mystified at why the administration hasn't picked even one. Now, they've done a remarkable job in changing the demographic and professional diversity of the bench. Big priority, but not one. You couldn't find one person to put on the DC Circuit, one person to put on the Second Circuit. I am mystified by this. That's unfinished business that would have to be carried forward in the next administration. And as we've just been saying, if you want to make whole of government stick, you have to stay at it for a long period of time. Keep in mind that the last major transformation effort took place in 1980 to 81. It was the Reagan administration. Ronald Reagan had 2 terms as president, and his vice president had another. That's 12 years of changing culture, changing budgets, bringing your cases, changing guidelines, picking judges. If it's a single Biden term, that won't happen that way. You need time to do this. This is a historical pattern that can't be changed. And as much as anything else, one of the biggest stakes in the coming election is the ability to shape the judiciary.
David, you want to comment on that?
Well, so I won't speak to electoral politics, but particularly in an election year. I will say, having lived through a number of transitions, actually, and you got at this a little bit, good ideas have staying power. I mean, there's evidence that's debated, and then there's evidence that's there. I mean, we saw that in the labor markets. And so, I do think a lot of the work done in each administration, the best ideas tend to carry forward. I think about the 2020 vertical merger guidelines. Those kind of grew out of a vertical case that was brought in the last administration. You can see, if you look at the sort of analytical details in there and the way the incentivability framework is structured, the guideline 5 and the new guidelines is an evolution of that. Are there changes? Yes, I think they're evolutionary changes, but it's an evolution of that. And even the 2020 vertical merger guidelines, we're building on work on raising rivals' costs and on MFNs that Fiona was familiar with in the Obama administration. So, I see, at a certain point, evolution becomes a revolution. The biologists can worry about when it's a new species. But I see an intellectual trend line where the good ideas stick and grow and are built upon.
You did really well in the beginning with these 2-word answers. Maybe I give you 3 this time for the final round. And maybe the question is, what changed from the past years would you wish to see that endures, or what is there on your wish list which has not yet been achieved? Bill, you look as if you were the first to answer.
I would like to cure the epidemic failure in our field to have greater historical awareness about where good ideas come from, why policy endures. In the first half hour today, several speakers talked about how the Chicago school's been abandoned. The Chicago school did it to us. That's a C+ understanding of the development of the US system. It's embarrassingly weak. Why? To build a movement, you need a core of support, and it was guys like Philip or Rita that provided the core support. You need a base that's broader than just the neos to make it work.
Okay, there was 300 words, but okay.
Yeah.
Fiona.
I'm very fond of the Illumina Grail decision. I think that's a big step forward on 2 fronts. Both, it's a non-horizontal merger. It went to the appeals court in the 5th Circuit, which is very conservative, so that's really a victory. It's also about innovation. It's about these multi-cancer early detection tests that aren't going to even be on the market for a number of years from now, so it's a bit like Microsoft in the sense that Bill Gates was worried about commoditizing the operating system, and that wasn't even a thing that was in the marketplace when that case was brought, and the same with these tests. And that's extremely important for courts to be able to grapple with future uncertainties, competition that doesn't have a price attached to it yet. It's just about innovation, and not horizontal, but a more complex related market transaction. So if that kind of jurisprudence stays, that would be extremely helpful.
FTC had a great expert, too.
Oh, thanks so much.
David.
Sure. I'll go a little past 3 as well. Well, the 2 words I'd focus on at the beginning, I'd like to see the diversity and rigor of economic work presented to the agencies continue to grow. And it has grown in the last few years. Both the diversity in terms of the nature of the economics, advancing to market realities, coming up with new tools, leveraging new data sources, new theories. And then the rigor, Fiona mentioned there's good and bad economics. There are a few bad apples who are devaluing the utility of the economic submissions to the agencies because it's difficult to tell when you first receive it, a white paper that's really good economics, from somebody who maybe doesn't take their professional obligations seriously and submits something that's not worth the paper.
People in this room can talk about that.
I don't think any of them are here, but.
Thank you so much. This was antitrust for the people. I think that's sort of the new sort of topic of this panel. We didn't see any volcanoes erupting in my perception, but it was still spectacular to listen to you. So thoughtful, so interesting. Thank you so much. Join me around.